The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Chapter 10. 3 Days Blizzard. When Laura's eyes opened in the morning, she saw that every nail in the roof overhead was furry white with frost. Thick frost covered every window pane, all the way up to its very top. The daylight was still and dim inside, and stout walls that kept out the howling blizzard. Carrie was awake too. She peeked anxiously at Laura from under the quilt on the bed by the stovepipe, where she and Grace slept. She blew out her breath to see how cold it was. Even close to the stovepipe, her breath frost white in the air. But that house was so well built that not one bit of snow had been driven through the walls to the roof. Laura was stiff and sore, and so was Carrie. But morning had come, and they must get up. Sliding out of bed into the cold that took their very breath away, Laura snatched up her dress and shoes and hurried to the top of the stairs. "Ma, can we dress down there?" she called, thankful for the warm, long red flannels under her flannel nightgown. "Yes, Pa's at the stables," Ma answered. The cook stove was warming in the kitchen, and the lamplight made it seem even warmer. Laura put on her petticoats and her dress and her shoes. She then brought down her sister's clothes and warmed them, and carried Grace downstairs, wrapped in quilts. They were all dressed and washed when Pa came in, and the milk half frozen in the pail. After he got his breath and melted the frost and the snow from his mustache, he said, "Well, the hard winter has begun." "Why, Charles," Ma said, "it isn't like you to worry about winter weather." "I'm not really worrying," Pa replied, "but it's going to be a hard winter." "Well, if it is," said Ma, "here we are in town where we can get what we need from the stores even in the storm." There would be no more school till the blizzard was over. So after the housework was done, Laura and Carrie and Mary studied their lessons and then settled down to sew while Ma read to them. Once she looked up and listened and said, "It sounds like a regular 3-day blizzard." "Then there won't be any more school this week," said Laura. She wondered what Mary and Minnie were doing. The front room was so warm that the frost on the windows had melted a little and turned to ice. Then she breathed on it to clear the peephole. She could see against the glass the blank white swirling snow. She could not even see Fuller's hardware store across the street, where Pa had gone to sit by the stove and talk with their other men. Up the street, past the hardware store, the Beasley's Hotel, and the baker's grocery, Royal Wilder's feed store was dark and cold. No one would come to buy feed in the storm, so Royal did not keep up the fire in the heater. But the back room where he and Almanzo were batching it was warm and cozy, and Almanzo was frying pancakes. Royal had to agree that not even their mother could beat Almanzo at making pancakes. Back in York State, when they were boys and later on Father's big farm in Minnesota, they had never thought of cooking. That was women's work. But since they had come west to take up homestead claims, they had to cook or starve. And Almanzo had to do the cooking because he was handy at almost anything, and also because he was younger. Then Royal, who was still thought that he was the boss, when he came west, Almanzo was 19 years old. But that was a secret because he had taken a homestead claim, and according to the law, a man must be 21 years old to do that. Almanzo did not consider that he was breaking the law. He knew that he would not be cheating the government. Still, anyone who knew that he was 19 years old could take his claim away from him. Almanzo looked at it this way. The government wanted this land settled. Uncle Sam would give a farm to any man who had the nerve and the muscle to come out here and break the sod and stick to the job till it was done. But the politicians far away in Washington could not know that settlers, so they must make rules to regulate them. The one rule was that the homesteader must be 21 years old. None of the rules worked as they were intended to work. Almanzo knew that men were making good wages by filing claims that fit all the legal rules, then handing over the land to the richest men who paid their wages. Everywhere men were stealing the land and doing it according to all the rules. But of all the homestead laws, Almanzo thought that the most foolish was the law about a settler's age. Anybody knew that no two men were alike. You could measure cloth with a yardstick or distance by miles, but you could not lump men together and measure them by any rule. Brains and character did not depend on anything but a man himself. Some men did not have the sense of 60 that some had at 16. And Almanzo considered that he was a good any day as any man 21 years old. Almanzo's father thought so too. A man had a right to keep his sons at work for him until they were 21 years old. But Almanzo's father had to put his boys to work early and trained them well. Almanzo had learned to save money before he was 10, and he had been doing a man's work on the farm since he was 9. When he was 17, his father had judged that he was now a man and had given him his own free time. Almanzo had worked for 50 cents a day and saved money to buy seed and tools. He had raised wheat on the shares in the western Minnesota and made a good crop. He considered that he was as good as a settler as the government could want, and at the age had nothing to do with it. So he said to the land agent, "You put me down as 21, and the agent had winked at him and done it. Almanzo had his own homestead claim now, and the seed wheat for next year that had been brought from Minnesota. And if he could stick it out on the prairies and raise a crop for 4 years, he would have his own farm." He was making pancakes, not because Royal could boss him anymore, but because Royal could not make good pancakes. Almanzo loved light, fluffy buckwheat pancakes with plenty of molasses. "Whew, listen to that," Royal said. They had never heard anything like that blizzard. That old Indian knew what he was talking about, Almanzo. "If we're not in for 7 months of this," the 3 pancakes on the griddle were holding their bubbles in tiny holes on the griddle where they were holding the bubbles, and they were crispy around the edge. He flipped them over neatly and watched their brown sides rise in the middle. The good smell of them mixed with the good smells of fried salt pork and boiling coffee. The room was warm, and the lamp with its tin reflector hung on the nail lighted it strongly. Saddles and bits and harnesses hung in the rough board walls. The bed was in one corner, and the table was drawn up to the stove hearth so that Almanzo could put the pancakes on the white iron stove plates without moving one step. "This can't last 7 months. That's ridiculous," said Royal. "We're bound to have a good spell from time to time." Almanzo replied airily, "Anything can happen, and most of the time it usually does." He slid his knife under the edge of the pancakes. They were done, and he flipped them onto Royal's plate and greased the griddle again with the pork rind. Royal poured molasses over the cakes. "One thing can't happen," he said. "We can't stick it out here till spring unless they keep the trains running." Almanzo poured 3 more rounds of batter from the battered pitcher into the sizzling griddle. He lounged against the warm walls of the and by the stovepipe, waiting for the cakes to rise. "We figured on hauling more hay," he said. "We've got plenty of dry feed for the team." "Oh, they'll get the trains through," Royal said. "But if they didn't, we'd be up against it. How about coal and kerosene and flour and sugar?" "Well, how long would my stock feed last at that, if the whole town came piling in here to buy it?" Almanzo straightened up. Nobody's going to get my seed, no matter what happens." "Nothing's going to happen," Royal said. "Whoever heard of a storm lasting 7 months? They'll get a train running again." "They better," said Almanzo. Turning the pancakes, he thought of the old Indian, and he looked at the stacks of seed wheat. They were stacked along the end of the room, and they were under the bed as well. The seed wheat did not belong to Royal. It belonged to him. He had raised it in Minnesota. He had plowed and harrowed and ground and stowed the wheat, the grain. He had it cut and bound and thrashed and sacked and hauled it 100 miles in his wagon. If storms like the storm delay of the trains, so that no more seed came from the east until after the sowing time, his crop for next year, his homestead would depend on his having the seed wheat to sow. He would not sell it, not for any money. It was to seed and make a crop. You could not sow silver dollars. "I'm not going to sell so much as a peck of my seed." All right, nobody's bothering your wheat," Royal answered. "How about some pancakes?" "This makes 21, Almanzo said, putting them on Royal's plate. "How many did you eat while I was doing the chores?" Royal asked. "I didn't count 'em," Almanzo grinned. "But gosh, I'm working up an appetite feeding you. So long as we keep on eating, we don't have to wash the dishes," said Royal.